Hi guys, this is the lesson part of the keyboard trainer synthesis module. This is going to last about 30 minutes, and the idea of this is to get a really good basic understanding of the different components of sound and really get you started in synthesis. There's a lot more in-depth training, lasts 2 or 3 hours, or some things last months of really dedicated training, and I'll link to those in the description. But the idea of this is to really get you in using the keyboard trainer MainStage template and kind of getting your hands dirty as soon as possible to start to work with these concepts. So we're going to be covering these topics here. We're going to talk about the three characteristics of sound being pitch, volume, and color. We're going to talk about different waveforms we use to generate sounds. We're going to then talk about envelopes or ADSRs. We'll talk about low frequency oscillators, then the different effects you can do to change your sound with reverb, chorus, and delay. Then we'll cover some examples of different settings and what those turn into as far as what you can hear. And then just making your own from scratch. So first topic here, characteristics of sound. Those are pitch. So first one's pitch, and that's the frequency of the sound. So what you would pretty much think about as pitch. Right, the only thing I just changed on that is the pitch. That's the frequency that you perceive that sound as. The next one is volume. So that's really the loudness, amplitude, the amount of energy of that sound. And we're going to talk about how to modify that and especially over time, how much of a change that can make to really the feel of your sound. And then finally, we'll talk about color. So that's your kind of the quality of the sound. Another name for it is timbre. But we're going to be using this term color. We're going to use pitch, volume, and color to describe what's happening with our sound. So speaking of color, the best way to kind of characterize that is to look at the different waveforms. So we'll dive right into this section here, and this is where we start with a lot of synthesizers. So color. So that's all the same pitch, but what you just heard was this very different coloring or the quality of the sound. And one way that we can affect that is by changing the source waveform. Though there's not a lot of there is a lot of technical detail we can go into this one, but let's just kind of suffice it to say that when a sound's being generated, there's different ways of doing it, different ways of producing those vibrations. And depending on how that happens, it has a different color to that sound. What you saw, even as I was doing that here in this frequency analyzer, is right. You could see that for there's this same fundamental pitch here. That's what we hear. But then these little peaks off to the side. And if you haven't dealt with one of these before, this is just looking at the different frequencies that's coming through our instrument and the volume that we're hearing those frequencies at. So for pulse, you see this is the main frequency, and then you have these harmonics off to the side. That's what really gives it that signature sound. Then we switch to saw, you see this got a little quieter, and then we have different harmonics to the side. This one, this one, and then there's that one, that very few harmonics, right? You got one that's barely coming up here. I can make this a little louder. You can see a few more, but a lot less harmonics, and that's what gives it that different color. So same pitch, same fundamental pitch here. This is what we hear to our ears. If you were to sing this is the frequency that you'd be singing, but then those harmonics change. And the main way to change that harmonic content is with this source waveform section. Generally, if you want a fluty kind of sound, you kind of hear, right? Kind of a fluty sound. If you want more of a stringy sound, the strings, the actual stringed instrument, when we put that bow across the string, or pick a guitar, A lot of times especially the strings, more of that bow sound. It makes that saw wave vibration. That's why it sounds so much like it. And then we have this pulse. A lot more kind of computery, kind of artificial sounding. But when you change the width of this pulse that's being generated, that's where you can start to get more maybe guitar-y kind of sounds. I have a banjo synth here that I made out of one of those. So those are the main types of waveforms that you come across. There's some more out there, but these are really the primary ones that are good to learn right off the bat here. So for the most part, we're going to be working with a saw wave because it does have so much of a rich harmonic content, and it tends to be the most popular one in the world of synths. So that's the source waveform and a little bit about the color of the sound. Now, one thing that you can also do to change the color of the sound is the filters to that. So this is called a low pass filter, basically telling it that anything lower in frequency to a certain spot can pass. That's what's called low pass. Everything higher than that is going to be filtered out or blocked or made so that you can't hear it. So watch what happens here. Right now, this is set at 100. This is set maximum. So picture here from low frequency to high frequency, our filter somewhere out here, basically having no effect. And then as we move that in and start to see these outer harmonics are starting to come down, right? You can't hear them as much. It sounds a lot more muffled because those harmonics are not changed. So we're again changing the color of that sound. One of the main topics here: the quality, the timbre, the color of that sound by using this filter here. And so you can kind of give a good sort of dynamic around it too when you change that filter. And we're going to be doing that here automatically in just a minute. So that's our filter. Another thing we can do with that filter is kind of bump up at that point where we are filtering the sound. We can actually increase the frequency. So we're blocking, but then at the very point where we're doing that block, we can actually give a little bit of a bump and give it kind of an interesting. You can see that this is technically where that filter is. And then as we move that cutoff down, you can see it's blocking everything to the right of it, but it's giving, or to the right, but it's giving a little bit of a bump right there. Not something that you would use a lot of, but just a little bit of it can give a little bit of kind of a shimmer or just a little extra special something. So that's what resonance means. So next, let's move over to the LFO. Remember, when I was doing this right here, that's kind of a nice effect. Gives it a nice rhythm to it. So one thing the LFO can do for us is actually automate that. So low frequency oscillator basically means it's something slower than these audible frequencies here. We go from 20 hertz. So 20 times a second, all the way up to 20,000, and anything kind of slower than that, we would call that the low frequency oscillator. That's not a sound we can hear, but we use that repetition, that the repeating effect to change other settings in our sound. So what we do here with this LFO is we have this set to quarter notes. So definitely a lot slower than 20 hertz, right? Quarter notes, and that those quarter notes are going to be affecting the cutoff frequency. That's what this LFO is set up for. We can do LFOs for a lot of things, but what you see a lot of times is it is automating, basically moving this knob back and forth at a certain constant rate, and that's what we're going to be doing here. So let's do that. So the waveform is how that happens, right? So at its most simplest, it's going to automate basically what we're doing here. So I'm going to do this manually, right? And you can do that yourself here on your own rig, right? So we're going to automate that. Right now, it was just my movements doing it, but by bringing the level up, right now it's 0, so it's not having any effect. It's doing the same thing I was doing, just a little faster because we have the rate up here. But if we do this, let's say, 1 bar, right? It sounds just like what I was doing because that's essentially what it's doing. It's just moving that cutoff frequency back and forth at a certain rate. So what this means here, this waveform, is I'm going to kind of draw it here with my cursor. It's going to go up, it's going to go down. It's going to have kind of this 45-degree slopes going up and down, as you can hear. And that waveform actually has a pretty big, impact to the sound of it. So let's change that to something else. So saw down is another one, and this is basically the same shape as this one here. We're going to go up, so we're going to hear a little bit more of that higher part of the sound, and then go down kind of gently, and then go straight up, and then go back down. Let's hear that. Up, and then bring down. So kind of more of a plucky kind of sound. Let's bring it up a little faster. Right, so it sounds like you're plucking on something, and a lot of times that's what that saw shape does when you do it either to a filter or to the volume overall. And we can make it more accentuated. So that's your LFO, and as you saw, I was adjusting the rate here, so that's how fast we do it. And this one happens to be tied to the rate of the song. So right now it's set at 130 BPM, and then so it's set at quarter notes inside of that. So that's your LFO. Again, so far we've been mostly impacting the color of the sound, right? If you do take a lot of the the harmonic content out or filter it out, you are going to affect the overall volume, or at least the the perception of volume. But for the most part, this has all been about changing the color of the sound, and then doing it over time with this LFO. Now we're going to be working though here on volume. So going back to the different characteristics, this is our focus area here when we talk about the ADSR. You can do this kind of changes to a lot of settings. It doesn't have to be just volume, but the most common and kind of the mandatory thing to do with ADSR is volume, and then from there there's some other things you can do. Now for those that aren't familiar with ADSRs, here's a slide that kind of shows what that's about. So this is a timeline here from left to right, and so first you're gonna be pressing your key down. So you're gonna go from 0 volume, you don't hear any sound, to pressing your key, and that's where this timeline starts. The A is how long before you're going to reach the 100% maximum volume for that sound. That's how fast that happens. The D is then how long before you go from the maximum to the sustain level that you've set for that sound. So the long-term key hold is right here. So you hold that press, you press the key, it's going to go up to the max, then potentially work down to a sustain level, and then as you hold that key, this is what it's going to stay at. For most of the sounds, this is the long-term volume of it. And then here, you're going to be letting go of the key. So how long before that release happens when we go back to 0? So this is your ADSR, and the thing to note is A is in time, so how many milliseconds this takes, and then how many milliseconds this takes. Sustain is a percentage, so it can go from 0 to 100% of how, where do you want to settle in at. And obviously when you're up here at 100%, the D doesn't really matter, right? Because the D is about how long it takes you to get from 100% to that level. And if you decided, hey, my sustain is going to be 100%, then your D will have no effect, because you're just be going from 100 to 100. Doesn't really matter how long that takes. And then again, release is then going from that high level down to your back to 0, and then the sound is done. So let's do a little bit of a demo here. So right now, this sound, we're gonna go back to the original settings. So very, very dry kind of sound, right? There's, it's on and off. You can kind of see my key right there, down, up, down, up. So what this is set at, these are in milliseconds again. You might see a few numbers here. This is 2.5 milliseconds. So let's call that 0. I just have that in there so you don't hear a little popping sound, which is what happens when you get to just 0. But essentially that's 0. So we have no attack time, right? This attack is all the way down. So it goes straight to that, 100%. And then nothing else. There's no decay either, right? So it's going, nothing's happening here. Plus sustain is 100 anyway, so it wouldn't really matter what our decay is, because we're staying at this 100% level, really, even though, these lines don't change, but these numbers do. And then release, again, this is a half a millisecond, so this is also 0. I just put that in there for another pop prevention. So if we wanted to draw this out, I'll just kind of like follow this with my cursor. We're going straight up to 100%, and then we're following that all the way across, as long as it's being held, and then as soon as I let go, it goes straight to 0. So instead of following this shape here that's drawn, kind of this generic drawing, this is really just a box. It's going straight up, it's going across, and then back down. Very boring sound, right? So let's make it a little more interesting. Let's add a little bit of an attack to this. Let's say, hey, what if it took us a second to go to 100%, right? So that's 1 Mississippi. And then this is still at 100, so we're not really doing any decay yet. So it's going up here, and it's going to stay there. And then, but then I let go, and you heard what happened, right? Went down to 0 immediately. That sounds pretty dry. So let's put a little release on there. Let's do another second. 1,000 milliseconds here is 1 second. It's close enough. So 1 second up. Then as long as I'm holding down the key, you can watch it here. And then I let go of that key, 1 Mississippi. And it works its way down. So it takes a second to go up to 100%, second to come down. Now, let's talk about the sustain. So let's set this at around 65 and see what happens there. So you hear what kind of happened. So it took a second to go up, and then you heard it kind of drop. Let's do it closer to 40. It'll be more pronounced. Right, so it went up, and then went actually straight down to the 40% as long as I held down the key, and then when I let go, it took a second to drop. Right, and let's add the last piece here. This is decay. So this is how long to get from this 100% level down to this 40%. Still, after after it's done with this attack phase. So let's put a little bit into here. It's a little bit more gentle coming down. All right, so it took about half a second. Let's give it a little bit more so you can hear it. And I'm going to bring this down a little bit too, just to make it more prominent. 1 Mississippi. So it took a second to come down. It just took a second to go down. Come up and then come back down again. So 2 seconds here at the very beginning it's going to take to go up and down. Now it's settling here around 30%. And then when I let go, it's going to take a second to come down. One more time, I'm going to follow this. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and then now it's staying here as long as you hold it. This is a level, 30%. And then I'm going to let go. It'll take a second for that. So you can already see only thing I changed from that dry saw sound originally is these ADSR settings, right? Nothing about, there's no color changes, nothing like that. This is all volume over time that I've changed and that we already have kind of this pad sound to it. So we take this dry saw sound, we increase some attack, we increase some release, and then it already feels like a pad. So that's basically how we change volume for the most part in a sense. Besides turning the overall volume up and down, ADSR is a big way that we would affect volume. All right, so now we're going to go into some of the effects that you can use to put some more just kind of interesting spins on your sound. So we're going to go back to a different sound here and go back. I always like to go back to just the straight up dry saw just to isolate that one effect that we're after. So reverb, this is essentially, when you're in a bathroom or maybe in an old church, what happens to sound is it starts to bounce around inside of rooms, especially if you have very reflective surfaces. So reverb is trying to mimic that, trying to keep that sound going a little bit longer. So really dry sounds like that. And then when you bring up the reverb, you can hear that sound reverberating kind of around a room. And that just by itself, you saw how much that really started to make that sound more interesting, something that you might hear in maybe an EDM track or something. So that's really what it is to reverb. There's settings that you'll usually see, and that's dry and wet. So dry is the sound that's going into it. That's the unaffected, the unchanged sound by that reverb plugin. And then wet is the amount that is reverberated. So if we took dry all the way down, all you're hearing then is the sound that went through that effect. If you press, I'm going to bring in the dry as I play. You can see we're mixing the unaffected sound with the affected sound. So that's reverb for you. It can do a lot for you, and I would highly recommend having at least a little bit of that to just give it more space, more kind of atmosphere. So we're going to bring that wet back down, and that'll get it to a very dry, that original sound we started with. Next one is chorus. So chorus is a good example of things we can do to change the pitch. So essentially what chorus does is it takes a copy of the sound, duplicates it, and kind of detunes it a little bit. That changes the pitch just a little bit. Where it doesn't sound out of tune, it just sounds like there's more than one of it there. So I'm going to play just the sound here. Right, so this specific chorus, it did that kind of detuning. Right now, if you listen carefully, it even sounds like there's more than one there. And then there's even a little bit of a kind of a cross effect between the two where they're kind of changing their pitch a little bit. This can go, so there we have probably even maybe 3 of them or so. There's quite a few that are detuned, and then it gets a little crazy. You can hear that kind of the pitch changing. So that's a quick way for you to get some kind of pitch effect into your sound that makes it a little more natural, a little more interesting. So that's the chorus, and then finally delay. That's really the echo sound that you hear. So before we talked about reverberations, but then think about maybe you're yelling into a canyon or something like that. So what are those echoes that are going to be kind of a longer term bouncing of the sound? And so right now the mix of that one is set to 0. So you can kind of look that as your wet indicator. And as you add to it, let's bounce back to a dry one. So we're just going to add delay here, or echoes, and right, so that's got adding that echo or delay to it. And right now it's set at quarter note, so you can set how fast that happens. A lot of times you'll see like dotted, or it's kind of a more of a natural sounding echo. So that's your delay. And then just to finish it off in the effects category, there is something called a arpeggiator. We won't go through a lot of detail, but it's a way to automate the the notes that are being played. So this is off, obviously. I'm gonna go back to this beginning sound. Right, but what you can do, we can turn the arpeggiator on, and let's do kind of a simple version. So you can see here, I'm just playing a chord, but it's automating that. Right? It's playing across that chord, and it's actually going up 2 octaves to do that. And there's even some more complex things you can do. Again, you see I'm just holding that chord, and it's doing a lot for you. So when you see arpeggiator, you just know that it's a way to automate the notes that you play. There's a lot of different types. There's a lot of different functionalities behind our arpeggiator, but just wanted to get you guys a little bit of a introduction to that. So next, let's go through some examples here, just to show how to create some of these different sounds. So I'm going to full screen this. All right, so this is our regular dry saw, and we learned a little bit about ADSR. So really the main change here between the dry saw and creating a warm pad is what I've done is I've brought that cutoff frequency down, so it's not going to be as harsh, right? We're changing the color of the sound here. Here we have a pretty subtle oscillation. So 22 is a level. It's going to take 2 bars to do that. And I'm using a triangle waveform. So that's what we're going to do to change this frequency a little bit. Just a subtle feel to it. Then I brought the overall volume up a little. The wetness of the reverb is up, so you're going to hear some reverb. Also, you're going to have some chorus effects, a little detuned, little duplicate signal there, and 2 seconds here of attack and a second and a half of release. Sustains 100%. There's no decay that I want out of this one. And let's see what that sounds like. So you can hear a long release time, right? That came in really slow, over 2 seconds. You also heard some of the kind of the movement that this thing here created by changing that cutoff frequency. Just every 2 bars going up and going back down again. And a little bit of a reverb just to give it more space, that chorus. So that's your warm pad. Another example here, it's called plucky pad. So that's where our decay is going to help a lot. When we're trying to get that kind of pluck sound that comes from a very kind of a hard beginning of a sound and then a quick drop off, that's where anytime you want to pluck, you're going to need some short decay on that one. So very short attack, very close to 0 here. Here we do have a decent release though, and the sustain is about 30%. Filter, we've brought that down, and still using the sawtooth wave for this one because it is still of a kind of a pad sound. So usually that means you want that. I also have just a very, very subtle LFO going on here on the cutoff frequency, and this time I'm using a saw down kind of effect on that one. It is a pretty fast one too, so subtle and fast. You're going to hear a lot of reverb. Again, some chorus. I always like that chorus here to thicken it up a little, and even some delay. So let's see what that sounds like. So you hear that decay was a lot for you whenever you want that pluck, and you can hear that bung 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 kind of sound. That eighth notes, just changing that cutoff frequency ever so slightly. There's a little bit of resonance in there too. That's another example. Let's go to banjo synth. So this is one where you'll hear that pluck even more. Right. So in this case, I've actually gone up to a modulated pulse wave here, pretty close to just a very, very skinny beginning here, so thin, and so this is no level here, no LFO, some reverb, not a whole lot, but here basically no attack. Then you have the decay, and there's no sustain, so 0% sustain. As soon as it's done with this third of a second or so decay, that's it, and then it does some release after that. So again, like I said before, any kind of guitar-y or banjo sound, this modulated pulse is going to be it's going to be your best bet. So next, flute organ. You can probably guess this one. We're going to use a triangle wave on this one because the triangle is more of a woodwind sound, and no filter here, and no LFO either for that filter. There's definitely some reverb, and about a third of a second almost here for the attack. There's some decay, pretty decent sustain level, and then pretty short release. So let's see what that sounds like. Right, so really churchy sounding. Right, again, the only changes I'm making are what you see in front of you here. So pretty amazing with just these small number of settings with the synthesizers, what you're able to do. And this one does not have chorus, surprisingly enough. With a triangle wave, it's already pretty thick, already pretty subtle. Don't really need it. So that's that one. Marimba ARP. So this is a marimba, so you definitely want that kind of that attack, quick attack, and you need that almost like that plucky kind of sound, like when you decay down to nothing. So I'm going to turn off this ARP here, but unlike the banjo or the kind of another plucked instrument, usually a marimba, any kind of thing that's bell based, the triangle might be a way to go for that one. And no filter work though, and there's some reverb as well and some echoes. So let's see what that sounds like. So a lot of chorus on that one, because with bells, you kind of need that detuned, or marimba it's really, but sort of any kind of xylophone or marimba or bells, that detuning is kind of a signature part of that sound. All right, and now we have a couple examples of some saws here. So back to the saw wave, frequency around 70, and this is a sidechain saw. So this is an effect that basically it's a saw up on the cutoff frequency, done every quarter note, and it's going to be very extreme here, 100 level. Got a little bit of reverb, and that's about it. The ADSR is very boring on this one, so basically 0 attack, 0 decay, 100% sustained release. So there's really no ADSR effect on this one. So let's see what that sounds like. So that pulsing, that kind of the sound like you hear a lot in music nowadays, that sidechain is what that's called. It's kind of a reverse effect. So this is saw up, right? So a lot of the things we're working on was a saw down. This is where it's going to sweep up with that cutoff frequency. So it'll be kind of like more muffled and then go brighten up over time and then bring back down. So it sounds like a kind of a reversed sound from what you would normally hear. Then here's another one where really no ADSR. It's chorus 1, the no delay because our mix is at 0, light reverb, and then this is really the same as the sidechain saw we just listened to, except we've brought that waveform in reverse. So instead of going up and then down, it's going to go straight up and then work its way down. So let's see what that sounds like. So I call that one kind of a pluck saw, but it's using the filter, the cutoff frequency, to create that pluck kind of sound versus the volume that you might hear from another pluck. So pretty significant at 70 quarter notes saw down. And again, if you compare these two, really the main difference is the shape of the waveform of that LFO, and that's it. So a third thing that's basically the same settings, except instead of the saw up or saw down, we're using a triangle for that LFO for the cutoff frequency. Essentially the same thing. All these three, the only difference is really the waveform, and I've tweaked the level a little bit. And in this one, I'm doing it a little bit faster. I'm going to eighth notes instead of quarter notes. So that's it. The only sound. The only thing that's changed is really that waveform. And then finally, the muffled piano. So for this one, I used a middle-sized here pulse wave. Cutoff frequency pretty darn low, and some pretty wet reverb here, 24%. No LFO, it's set at 0. No echo, no chorus. And this one here, I do have some kind of initial effects. So initial attack, very quick attack, but the decay is there's some decay there. So you're going to hear a little punch at the beginning, and then the sustaining down to 40%, and then a pretty long release. So try to get as close to a muffled piano sound. Really ends up being more like a electric piano. This is another electric piano. So the main change here is, so a little more chorus. I gave it a little thinner of a pulse on that one, and a couple other changes. So pretty decent electric piano out of this thing. So those are the presets that I thought of. And then just to start from scratch here as an example. So this is your same saw wave that you've always used. And for this one, let's change it to a triangle wave. And since triangle waves are generally quieter, I'm going to use this dry knob here for reverb just to be our overall volume. So pretty boring, right? So we have no real ADSR effect anywhere else, no real effect. Let's try a little chorus. Sounds a little more interesting. That kind of that detuned effect. And then let's try to go for maybe like a bell sound. So for a bell, you need that attack and then kind of almost a plucky kind of sound. So now remember, with decay, you have to have a sustain less than 100%, or your decay doesn't really mean anything, right? So let's see what happens when we bring that all the way down. That's nice. Already sounds kind of like a marimba, kind of a bell sound, except it really ends abruptly, right? And the way to prevent that, we got a little release. Right, so there we go. We already have a kind of marimba sound. If we want to make it sound a little bit more realistic, we got a little bit of reverb there, and even a little bit. Right, we got that. So there's one example. Another one we could do is let's try to make our own pad. So pads usually come out of saw wave. So usually what you do for a pad is you're going to bring the cutoff frequency down where it's not that harsh, right? You want something usually a little warmer. And then remember, we don't really like that instant attack, instant release. So let's bring that up a little bit on both of them. And maybe a little bit, we could accent the beginning of it a little bit. Not quite that much, but it's a little bit too sudden. Bring that down a little. Not bad there. We could add a little bit extra. Bad. Maybe a little reverb. Kind of go past that relief. It's a pretty decent pad right there. So next, it's really going to be you playing with this, playing with different settings. Now that you've got a basic understanding for what these different things do, really start to adjust things and see what it is you like, what it is you don't like, and hopefully this is going to be a good foundation for the rest of your journey as you learn more about synthesis and sound design. So hope you enjoyed this. If you were especially benefited by it, then please do consider a donation at the link at the bottom. Thanks. Bye.